This is my paint thickness chart. At the bottom is very, very thin paint, and at the top is the thickest paint you can get. And the problem is you're starting your painting off way up here, which means you only have this amount of space to work with for the rest of your painting. Hi, welcome to Paint Coach. I'm Chris Fornatero, here to help simplify oil painting so you can get better faster. A lot of beginning painters struggle to know how thick or thin to make their paint. And the answer to that actually lies in when to make it thick or thin. Now, I've sort of already made a video on this topic. If you want to watch that, I highly suggest it. Put a link to that above. And this video is going to build off that and go into more depth and answer some more questions about specifically how thick or thin to make the paint during certain stages of the painting to give you the most success. Okay, before we jump in, if you're liking the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. You can follow me on Instagram and see what I'm painting on a daily basis at 4is43. If you have questions or want to see videos made on certain topics, please let me know in the comments section. And if these videos just aren't enough, if you're looking just for more information, you want to see full real-time painting video tutorials where you see every single stroke, you can see those on my Patreon page, which is also linked in the description below. All right, first off, I just want to say this is how I do it. There are many different ways to use oils. And the one thing that I've learned from watching a lot of great painters is that everyone does it a little bit differently. What I'm going to be talking about today is mainly for wet into wet painting, meaning you're going to be painting into wet paint. This is the case when you're painting alla prima or pretty much any time working on a painting past a couple days. So if you ever wondered how artists do great paintings in one sitting, this video is probably going to help explain that. So when you're painting and you start to paint over an area that you've previously painted and the brush just skids across it and the paint doesn't come off and it slips and it slides and you can't do anything. So why does this happen? It's because the paint that is on your brush is thinner than the paint that is on the canvas. You've made the paint on your canvas too thick too quickly, and now you can't paint over it. This idea of painting over thin paint with thick paint is commonly referred to as painting thin to thick. In short, this means you start out your painting with thinner paint, and as you progress, you get thicker and thicker with your paint. This is my paint thickness chart. At the bottom is very, very thin paint, and at the top is the thickest paint you can get. And the problem is you're starting your painting off way up here, which means you only have this amount of space to work with for the rest of your painting. If you started down here, you would have the whole chart to work with and to build your painting. A lot of times in the beginning stages of the painting, I'm moving the paint around the canvas. I'm moving it to where I want it to be. I'm pushing it, I'm pulling it. And as my painting progresses, the paint gets thicker. By the end, where I am applying the paint, I'm putting a brush mark down and I'm leaving it there. It's almost as if I'm sticking the paint onto the canvas like a sticker. So how do we control the thickness of the paint? A key difference between watercolors and acrylics and oils, the colors of watercolors and acrylics tend to all pretty much be the same thickness or texture. Oil paints, from color to color, the thickness can vary quite a lot. We have the ability to control that thickness with two things: paint thinner and medium. I'm gonna use another chart here to explain the different stages of the paint as I go through a painting. And this first stage is the wash. It's the paint with so much paint thinner it looks like watercolor. This is normally used when I'm blocking in just the general shapes and structure of the painting. Paint thinner can be referred to by many things. There's turpentine, terpenoid, terps, Gamsol, mineral spirits. And paint thinner is pretty much going to act like the way water does with watercolors and acrylics, in that it's going to be used to clean your brush and sometimes to thin out the paint. Using paint thinner to thin out your paint will also speed up the drying time, which can be a good or bad thing depending on where you are in your painting. Using paint thinner also knocks down the pigment of your paint, which is why it's used a lot at the beginning of the painting for layers that won't be seen by the end. Artists that draw in their subject matter with paint or block it in or do an underpainting tend to do so with just paint thinner and paint. And the paint thinner is going to speed up the drying time, which is actually good for blocking in a painting because it's going to allow you to easily build over top of it. So the next level, I'm going to be still using paint thinner, but not nearly as much paint thinner. You can see in my chart, I'm adding paint to my previous wash mixture, increasing the percentage of paint to paint thinner. So in relative to the whole painting, this is still a thin mixture, but since it's thicker than my wash, I'm going to be able to paint over my wash very easily. And I usually have my paint at this stage when I'm still kind of blocking in the painting. I'm finding the major values and shapes and colors. I still want to keep the paint thin because I know I'm going to be building a lot more layers on top of this. So at a certain point, you're going to want to start pushing your colors to what they will look like in the final painting. So you're going to want to stop using the paint thinner because you don't want to desaturate your colors at all. You want them to be as rich as possible, but you still need to control the fluidity of the paint. This is where medium comes into play. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos, you know I'm a big fan of linseed oil, especially for people starting out. If you go take a painting course anywhere, chances are on the first day they're going to hand you a jar of linseed oil. It's a slow drying medium, and I know that a lot of people are afraid of the slow dry time, and they go out and they try and buy mediums that will quicken the drying time of their paint. Now, as you've seen previously in the video, I'm not against drying the paint quickly in certain parts of the painting, but when you get to the meat and potatoes of the painting where you really want to push and pull and move the paint around, you're going to want that dry time to be as slow as possible. The slow drying time of oil paint is one of the things that makes it so different from acrylics and watercolors. So lean into that, use it as an advantage. Don't run away from it. Now, a little linseed oil goes a long way. I normally pour an inch or so into a jar and set it next to my jar of paint thinner while I'm painting. Using that isn't complicated. Just while you're painting and mixing up your colors and you want to change the fluidity of your paint, just dip your brush in and add it as you see fit. Just be careful not to use too much. If your paint gets too fluid, you're not going to be able to do much with it and layer it on top. And also, I highly suggest just scraping it off your palette or wiping it up instead of trying to add more and more paint into it to thicken it out, because you're probably just going to end up wasting a lot of paint doing that. So I'm going to paint in the next part of my chart with paint thinned out with a good amount of medium. Now again, this paint is still considered thin, but since it is thicker technically than paint thinned with paint thinner, I'm going to be able to paint over top of the previous layer easily. As I move to the next level of the chart, I'm just going to add more paint into this paint medium mixture, increasing the amount of paint in the mixture, therefore making it thicker. So adding medium to your paint is still making it thin. So since I'm adding more paint, I'm making it thicker, which is going to allow me to paint over top of my previous layer. All right, now we're going to be moving on to using just straight paint. And even though we're using straight paint, there still is a range of how thick or thin you can make the paint. And I feel a lot of people don't know exactly how to load the paint onto your brush. You want to pull the paint out with your brush and kind of stroke it on the palette as you mix it. I almost kind of see these as practice strokes, so by the time you place the paint on the canvas, you already know how thick or thin it's going to be. So as you jump to using just straight paint, don't go too thick too quickly. So back to the chart, I'm going to paint my next level with just straight paint. And just straight paint is thicker than paint with medium in it, so it's going to go right over top. All right, now for the last block. I'm going to be using just straight paint, but I'm really going to load it up. I'm going to pretty much make it as thick as I can. And since it's thicker than the previous layer, it's not going to slip and slide around and not work. It's going to lay over how I want it to. So there's the chart, 6 levels all layered on top of each other. Now there is one more level of thickness that you could go on this chart. And that is when you use a palette knife. Using a palette knife allows you to apply thicker paint than you could with a brush. Now I'll admit, I'm not the best with a palette knife, but I've definitely used it in certain areas of my paintings to get the paint to a certain thickness. Don't ever fall into the trap of thinking there's certain cutoff marks where you're just going to stop using thinner for the rest of the painting, or you're going to stop using medium for the rest of the painting. There's a lot of gray area, and there's times when you'll start using medium, then you'll go back and maybe use a little more paint thinner. You know, you'll start using paint and go back to the medium, vice versa. You know, it's not an exact, clean, structured system the way I presented it. I've just presented it this way to make it easier for you to digest and learn. So when it comes time to painting, use this information. It is true and helpful, but still listen to your instincts when you feel you need to switch or move left to right on something. So what do you do when you realize you've made an area too thick and you don't want to put thicker paint on top of it? One of the things is you can actually go work on a different section of the painting and kind of let that part dry a little bit. I've done this before. If a section's just too much, or I just know I need a certain part of it to dry, I will just wait till the next day. And it's not completely dry to the touch, but it's kind of tacked up a little bit. The paint is tacked up, and just allowing it to dry for a day will make it so you can paint over it a lot easier. But if you're working alla prima, or you don't want to wait a day, or it's just a lot of paint, you can always just scrape it off with a palette knife or wipe it off with a paper towel and just rebuild that area again. Don't ever forget that oil painting is not just an additive process, it's also a subtractive process. And don't be afraid to wipe off certain areas or scrape down areas or remove paint in any way. I know painting with oils can be tough, but trust me, if you practice, you will get better and you will have so much fun. So just keep going. As always, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'm Chris Fornatero here telling you to go get painting. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button. I also offer you this video and this video. They both will change your life forever. Just pick one. You can't go wrong.